Hi, it's Katrina. Some of the most incredible things in the world are hidden far above us on mountaintops. Today I'll be exploring a lost kingdom from the days of the Silk Road, the sanctuary of an ancient water goddess, and the unbelievable origin of the Black Death. So get ready! The Lost Silk Road Kingdom. A shocking new discovery in Tajikistan has been compared to Machu Picchu. It's the most important archaeological discovery in the country's history. A massive site situated at the top of a high bluff overlooking a winding river. Even in pictures, it's tough to tell this site apart from Machu Picchu. You're not going to believe what's at the center of this place. I'm so excited, I don't know where to start. I think a brief history of the Pamir Mountains will help you appreciate this amazing discovery even more. Throughout the Dark Ages and into the Middle Ages, a diverse group of people lived in the Pamir Mountains that stretch across Central Asia. They were ruled by kingdom after kingdom, many of these empires so obscure that archaeologists don't know much about their history. Like, for example, the Shugnan Kingdom. They ruled this mountainous region of Tajikistan and Afghanistan from around the 6th to the 8th century AD. At that time, the Silk Road moved through these mountains. It was a major pilgrimage route that connected China to India. According to an ancient Chinese text written during the Tang Dynasty, the Shugnan Kingdom ruled from their capital city of Kuhan. It was located somewhere high in the mountains. No historical source mentions the origins of Shugnan, its specific borders, its people's belief system, or the location of its capital city. The only thing historians know is that it existed in the Pamir Mountains. Also, its people were probably the descendants of Iranian-speaking Saka tribes, meaning they likely practiced Zoroastrianism. They would have worshipped the god Ahura Mazda in majestic fire temples. Instead of burying their dead, they would have left corpses out in the open for the birds to eat, and then later buried their bones. In 2012, a mysterious mound of rubble was discovered near the small village of Ruzvat in the Pamir Mountains. The man called to investigate was Yusufsho Yakubov, chief archaeologist at Tajikistan's National Academy of Sciences. He immediately realized the mound of rubble was important. This was a special place, one he had been searching for his whole life. An excavation followed, revealing bits and pieces of a great city hidden in the mountains for more than 1,000 years. Soon, Yakubov found the ruins of a fire temple, a temple that at one time had sheltered the eternal flame of Zoroastrianism. I know, this is starting to sound like some stuff from a fantasy book, but it's all real. Fire cults, crazy temples, bizarre empires hidden in the mountains, it's all real. The discoveries kept on coming. Over the last decade, archaeologists have found walls, mausoleums, and defensive structures, plus evidence of winemaking, gold processing, and coin minting. While it's not 100% confirmed, Yakubov believes he has discovered Kuhan, or Kadon, the capital of a kingdom whose real name is gone. And now for the thing I told you at the beginning of the video that you wouldn't believe. In the center of the city's ruins is an empty meadow. But it wasn't always a meadow. Archaeologists think it was an ancient arena for the sport of buzkashi. In English, you can just call it dead goat polo. Should I? Do you really want me to tell you? I can move on to the next shocking discovery and never mention it again. But okay, here it is. Dead goat polo is a traditional sport of Central Asia, practiced by the ancient nomads of places like Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. It's very similar to normal polo, but instead of a ball, players used an actual dead goat. It's like playing basketball with a dead pig. I don't mean to sound gross, but that's the reality of this very real sport. And yes, the game is still played today. It's a popular sport apparently in Afghanistan. It was briefly banned by the Taliban when they took power, but after the Taliban was ousted in 2001, dead goat polo was played once more. I'm not sure how popular it is now, but if you know, please be sure to let us know in the comments below. At least they're not using human heads. The gold coin in the icy mountains. A very small gold coin is causing a big stir in the archaeology community. The unique coin was discovered in the Norwegian mountains, and it's from the Byzantine Empire. The coin is about 1,000 years old and nobody can figure it out. How did this 1,000-year-old Byzantine coin end up high up in the Norwegian mountains? Local archaeologist Maytov Simiseth was contacted by a metal detectorist. The man with the metal detector had come across an ancient coin in the mountains and wanted to know more about it. Maytove was shocked when she saw the coin. It's a one-of-a-kind specimen. Not a single other one like it ever found in the whole country. The gold coin originated from Constantinople, the city we call Istanbul today. It's known as the Byzantine Histamenon Nomisma, type of currency introduced in the city of Byzantium in 960. On one side of the coin is Christ holding the Bible. On the other side are Emperors Basil II and Constantine VIII. Why two emperors? Because from 976 until 1025, Byzantium was ruled by a pair of brothers. The coin was presumably minted in the early part of the 11th century. The mystery is how it made its way to Norway. The coin was probably traded to a Viking at some point. There's no telling which Viking or why. It ended up back in Scandinavia, where the coin made it into the pocket of somebody who went on a great journey across the frigid mountains. Maybe this person died on their journey. Maybe the coin fell out of their pocket. Either way, it remained frozen under the Norwegian ice until now. If only the coin could talk and tell us of its adventures. The Dark Cave of Mountain Witches. The mystifying landscape of Spain's Zugarramurdi can be found in the north in the region of Navarra. At first glance, the landscape is gorgeous. There are historical houses, cattle grazing, and old picturesque churches. But when you dig a little deeper, you start to come across some stuff straight out of a creepy fairy tale. Not the fun ones, the creepy ones. Not far from the village of Zugarramurdi is the cave, accessible by walking through a dense woodland and up the side of a small mountain. You don't even realize you've transitioned from forest to cave because it happens gradually, with the woods petering out into a massive gallery. This is a huge rocky vault once used by witches to hold demonic Satan-worshipping parties. According to local legend, hundreds came from across Spain to gather within the enormous cave for evil rites. The village became inflamed with evil, the villagers being taken over by pagan ideas and devil worship. There were wild parties thrown in the cave, its entrance lit up by blazing bonfires. It was the best place for witches to hang out. Nobody knows if the legends are true or only dangerous rumors. Either way, the stories caught the attention of Spanish inquisitors during the Middle Ages. In 1610, the Spanish Inquisition descended on Zugarramurdi like the flaming fist of God. 40 women were accused of witchcraft, many of them by their own neighbors. Out of the 40 accused, 11 were burned at the stake. These days, there is a small panel near the entrance of the cave listing the names of those who were executed for witchcraft. Their memory lives on, and so does the creepy atmosphere of Zugarramurdi. Would you dare spend a night alone in this place? Let me know in the comments. Mexico's Forgotten Cliff Dwellers. Look closely at this picture, photograph taken by Stephen H. Lexon. It looks like an ordinary cliff, right? It's only when you really look that you start noticing the gaps in the cliff, the neatly carved alcoves where an ancient civilization used to live. These are the cliff dwellings of the Sierra Madre, located in Mexico's Chihuahua state. There are more than 30 rooms here, some of them more than 2 stories tall within the caverns. But who built them? What was the point? And when were they abandoned? The first thing you need to know is that these cliff dwellings are not alone. Eduardo Gamboa from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History has spent more than a decade studying 180 similar dwellings spread across Chihuahua. He's one of only a few archaeologists who have ever bothered investigating these amazing places. Before Eduardo, there was Norwegian explorer Carl Lumholtz, who studied the Sierra Madre cave homes in the 1890s. The mysterious caves were probably made around the year 1300, maybe a little earlier, in 1250 AD. There is a theory floating around that they were made by the same people who abandoned the Mesa Verde cliff dwellings in the American Southwest. I've talked about Mesa Verde and the Anasazi a lot on this channel, but if you've missed it, be sure to check out more videos to learn about these lost people. The Anasazi were the ones who built the incredible cliff homes in the American Southwest, in Utah, New Mexico, Nevada, and Colorado. But they also vanished between 1250 and 1290, fleeing into historical obscurity. Most archaeologists don't know why the Anasazi disappeared. Maybe it was political unrest, perhaps widespread violence, or maybe drought. Archaeologists also say they don't know where the Anasazi went after their exodus. But I have a suggestion for you. Some scholars are starting to clue in that the Anasazi didn't just disappear. They probably went south, where they continued their tradition of building cliff dwellings in the Sierra Madre of Mexico. There's even some evidence for it. At the amazing cliff dwellings in Mexico, archaeologists have identified very specific T-shaped doors. These kinds of doors also appear in the Four Corners region at Anasazi ruins. They can be found at Chaco Canyon, dating from the 11th century. T-shaped doors only started appearing in Mexico after the Anasazi fled. The connection here seems quite obvious and may solve a centuries-old mystery. The Holy Mountain of China. China's holy mountain of Fanjingshan is so beautiful it's being called otherworldly, a mountain of paradise, and one of the greatest Buddhist pilgrimage sites on the planet. Starting in the 14th century, Buddhists of the Tang Dynasty began climbing up the mountain and literally into the clouds to build temples. You can't get closer to the gods than that. By 1644, with the Tang Dynasty long gone and the Ming Dynasty in control, the Buddhists had completed 48 temples. Over the years, many of those temples have been destroyed. The few that survive make for the best photo opportunities of your life. The spectacular views make you feel like you're standing on Mount Olympus. The highest peak is the Golden Summit, towering more than 7,500 feet above sea level. But it's the Red Cloud's Golden Summit that I want to tell you about. The peak is about 600 feet lower than the tallest summit, but it's also home to a pair of temples connected by a small bridge. This isn't a normal mountain peak. The mountain rises to where the peak should be, then a massive spire of rock like a tower shoots up into the sky. The rock tower moves up vertically about 330 feet, and at the top splits into two very small plateaus. On one side is the Temple of the Buddha, and on the other side is Maitreya Temple. A narrow gorge separates them, but you can walk across it on the short bridge if you don't mind being utterly scared out of your wits. If you're afraid of heights, forget about it. I'll leave you with my favorite picture of the two temples. Isn't that amazing? How in the world did they even get the building materials up that stone spire? Do you want to visit? Let me know in the comments below. The City Councilman and the Mountain Giant. In 2023, a former Oregon City Councilman saw a giant. It sounds completely insane, but James Goebel seems to be sticking to his story. James said that as he made his way through a rural area near the Green Peter Reservoir, he saw a giant open a mountain rock formation like it was a door and peek out at him. Wait, what? Is James serious? He totally is. The former council member said he saw the mythical creature, but it went back into its hiding place inside the mountain before he started filming. This happened on October 23rd of last year, just off the edge of the road in the Cascade Foothills. In the video, which as you can imagine went viral, James said that giants are real. He was convinced, and still is. Although I should mention that he did delete the video. James complained that people started approaching him in public, calling him the giant guy. In the days and months since the bizarre encounter, James has been returning to the wilderness to search for evidence of the giant he believes he saw. He's made a few videos pointing out strange cracks in the rocks and bizarre formations that he insists prove there is a secret race of giants living in the Cascade Foothills. James isn't the only one who believes. There are rumors that the Cascade Foothills are home to a secret entrance that leads into the inner earth. James may have seen a giant peeking out from a doorway to another world. Or maybe James is crazy. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the matter. The ancient portal to the underworld. While I'm on the subject of portals to other worlds, let's explore a creepy cave in the Judean hills near Jerusalem. It's called Twins Cave, a place where recent exploration revealed evidence of pagan rituals and necromancy. The cavern, located at the end of a grueling 2-mile hike, may have been viewed as a portal to the underworld. A team of archaeologists from Bar Ilan University were exploring the dark corners of the cavern when they found 42 ancient clay lamps. They identified the lamps as being from the late Roman period. probably after the 3rd century AD. The lamps were in a tough part of the cave to access, at the end of a vertical shaft 70 feet long. Archaeologists are baffled as to how ancient people even made it up and down the shaft. It would have been like climbing up and down a massive chimney. The lamps have proved an amazing discovery. They weren't burned or used. Instead, they had been left at the end of the vertical shaft, probably as an offering. They were left there as part of a ritual to guide the Greek goddess Demeter into the underworld. In Greek myth, Demeter's daughter Persephone was kidnapped by Hades and brought down to Tartarus. Demeter descended into the dark and spooky underworld to bring her daughter home. In the end, Demeter and Hades came to an agreement. Persephone would stay 6 months of the year with Hades in the underworld as his wife. During that time, Demeter would no longer care for the life of the planet. Then, for the other 6 months, Persephone could be at the surface. Demeter was so happy to get her daughter back that she once more took care of the world's plants, ushering in spring. This was the Greek myth to explain the summer and winter cycles. The lamps in the cave are all part of that myth. The lamps prove that even as Christianity was spreading, people kept practicing their pagan rituals. It's believed necromancy was also practiced within the cave. Nobody was reanimating the dead, but they were probably summoning spirits from the netherworld, or at least trying to conjure ghosts. The Lost Tribe of the Appalachian Mountains. The oldest civilization in the Americas may have lived in the Appalachian Mountains. It's a bizarre mystery that centers on Virginia's Clover Hollow Mountain, where some of the earliest American settlers found themselves struggling to survive. The thing about the Appalachian Mountains is that they are gorgeous. There are valleys and rivers running through the mountains that take people's breath away when they first lay eyes on them. People have always had a tendency to settle near these types of places in human history. The Mesopotamians settled along the Euphrates and Tigris rivers at the dawn of civilization. American settlers made a home for themselves along the river's edge at Clover Hollow Mountain. But they weren't the first. Long before European pioneers colonized Virginia, Clover Hollow Mountain was home to the Cherokee. The Cherokee indigenous people used the mountain as their sacred hunting grounds. Along the edges of Sinking Creek, strange petroglyphs have been discovered, hinting at a time many centuries before today. That's just the beginning. There are strange stone formations that suggest people were living in this part of Appalachia even before the Cherokee. There are oodles of mysteriously cut rocks that look as if they are covered in prehistoric petroglyphs. Petroglyphs too old to have been made by the Cherokee. Then there are the unbelievable stone alignments found on either side of Sinking Creek that look suspiciously like gateposts. What is going on? This is not a place that has been inspected thoroughly by archaeologists or any kind of scientist for that matter. The strange stones, some of them anthropomorphic in style, are up for speculation. They look as if they belonged to an ancient society, but which one? Is there really a lost tribe from Clover Hollow Mountain? The Minoan Palace of Zominthos. There's an ancient Minoan palace at the top of a mountain in Crete. This is awesome. A monolithic palace straight out of a fantasy, standing 4,000 feet above sea level. This outstanding ruin proves the Minoans weren't just a seafaring civilization. They were also mountaineers. The palace isn't a new discovery by any means. It was found in 1984 at the top of Mount Ida. Archaeologists think there was a route that went from the city of Knossos up the mountain and then down to the Idaean Cave. Knossos was the greatest city of the Minoans, a fortress of power and wealth. The Idaean Cave was the sacred seaside sanctuary where legend says that Zeus was born and raised. The Zominthos Palace lay smack dab in the middle. It may have been used as a rest stop for visitors. Pilgrims from the city of Knossos relaxed a while, letting themselves recuperate from climbing the mountain. Mountaineering wasn't exactly a hobby for people who lived 2,500 years ago. The heaving and huffing was real. Now let's dig into some facts. Over the many excavations done here, archaeologists have found some very cool stuff. Like, check out this double-headed bronze axe found in the ruins of the palace. The image is from the Archaeological Institute of America. The axe was a religious item, likely used in strange ceremonies that we don't understand. The palace was built at the start of the 17th century BC. It would have been used during pilgrimages in the spring and summer when the weather was nice. In the winter, when the snow dusted the mountain peaks, the palace probably remained empty. Ancient marijuana in the Chinese mountains. There are an estimated 150 million people who regularly smoke marijuana. Cannabis, weed, pot, whatever you want to call it, it's one of the most popular recreational drugs on the market. Actually available at the supermarket next to the beer if you happen to live in Canada. It's actually readily available in many places now. According to a new study, people were already smoking cannabis 2,500 years ago on a mountain in China. Archaeologists Ren Meng and Yang Yimin led a team of researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences to a remote mountain plateau in western China. This plateau happens to be in a place that I already told you about today, the Pamir Mountains. These mountains spread from China across Tajikistan and into ancient Persia. The team focused their energy on the Jirzankal Cemetery, about 9,000 feet above sea level. They excavated skeletons, bowls, and Chinese harps. They also found wooden braziers that had been used for burning certain materials. I have a feeling you already know what materials were burned. The scientific team identified trace elements of cannabis. This took a little bit of work, using chromatography and mass spectrometry to confirm individual chemical compounds. The levels of THC were off the charts. The THC, the ingredient in weed that alters your mind, was much more potent than what's found in regularly grown cannabis. This appears to have been some super weed. Plus, evidence shows it was burned indoors. The mysterious culture in China's section of the Pamir Mountains were hotboxing their mausoleums during funerary services, getting everyone baked out of their minds. Ren and Yang believe this is some of the earliest evidence of cannabis being used specifically for psychoactive purposes. Chinese farmers were using cannabis 4,000 years ago for making rope and paper, but they weren't smoking it yet, and the stuff they might have smoked was extremely weak. Keep in mind this doesn't mean that everybody in ancient China was smoking grass. Ren and Yang said cannabis was probably restricted to the elite members of society. Only during the Silk Road did strong pot start to spread across Asia. By 440 BC, the Scythian warlords of the Eurasian steppes were hotboxing their tents. The double destruction of Jerusalem. Jerusalem hasn't had much peace in its history as a city. In 586 BC, it was destroyed by the Babylonians. In 70 AD, it was destroyed by the Romans. Now, a new archaeological investigation on Mount Zion has revealed evidence of both violent episodes in the city's life. You've probably seen Mount Zion without even realizing it. It's a large mountain, well, more like a big hill, outside the walls of Jerusalem's old city. Geographically speaking, Mount Zion is the name of the hill upon which the original city of David was built. These days, the word Zion is often used for the whole of Israel. In any case, the mountain is ancient, covered in streets, old walls, honking cars, churches, and hundreds upon hundreds of pilgrims. It's also an archaeological mess, with layers of history piled one on top of the other. It's a nightmare for researchers to try and excavate. Near the top of the hill, archaeologists found evidence of Jerusalem's destruction in 70 AD by the Romans. A few feet underneath, there was evidence of the attack in 586 BC, but these were only 2 episodes. What you might not know is that Jerusalem has been attacked 52 times, captured 44 times, and besieged 23 times. This is according to Professor Eric Klein, who wrote the book on Jerusalem's history of being attacked. What's amazing about Mount Zion is that it's the only place where physical evidence of the Babylonian and Roman attacks has been discovered. For example, archaeologists found bronze and iron arrowheads used to slaughter the Jerusalemites by the Babylonians almost 2,600 years ago. Evidence of the Roman attack 2,000 years ago comes in the form of calcified stones. Researchers found bricks that were superheated as the Romans scorched house after house, putting the whole city to the torch. Of all the places in Jerusalem, none holds more history of doom and bloody warfare than Mount Zion. The oldest bed in the world. Humans hate sleeping on the ground. We've hated it for a long time, for at least 200,000 years. The reason I know this is that archaeologists found what they think is the oldest bedding in the world at the top of a mountain in South Africa. Check out this thing and let me know at the end of the video if you think this prehistoric bed is comfortable enough for you. The incredible discovery was made inside a cliffside cavern in the Lebombo Mountains called Border Cave. Humans lived here starting about 227,000 years ago. They continued to live inside the cave until 1,000 years ago. What a crazy timeline! This seemingly boring, dark, and somewhat spooky cave was home to our ancestors for 250,000 years. All kinds of things have been found in the mountain cave, but the bedding is by far the most exciting. The bed was simple, bits of grass laid over several layers of ash. Researchers think the ash was to keep crawling insects away. Humans were already figuring out ways to avoid bugs at the dawn of our very existence. Archaeologist Lynn Wadley helped discover the ephemeral fossilized grass in the cave. She said the layer was probably a foot thick, about as comfortable as a haystack. Near the bed, Lynn's team also found traces of burned camphor bush. People in East Africa still burn the camphor bush to this day to repel insects. The bottom line here is that bugs are a no-go when it comes to humans, and comfortable sleeping arrangements are a must. Origins of the plague. The Black Death was the worst pandemic in human history. There is no evidence of any other sickness spreading quite like the medieval plague. But do you know how it all started? The origin of the plague has been traced back to an isolated mountain. The plague in Europe lasted from 1346 until 1353. There were aftershocks of the plague, but it was in those main 7 years that the worst of the destruction unfolded. The bacterium Yersinia pestis wiped out almost everyone. By almost everyone, I mean roughly 60% of everyone in Europe. The casualties numbered around 50 million. But how did it start? The plague entered the Mediterranean on trade ships in 1346. Goods were being transported from territories controlled by Mongolia's Golden Horde in the Black Sea region. The disease came from the Black Sea on boats, was unloaded at Mediterranean ports, and from there it spread into Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. These 3 territories were all closely connected by the Mediterranean and their merchant empires. Here's something that may come as a huge shock to you. Although the worst of the pandemic was finished by 1353, it wasn't over. The plague lasted 500 years. The secondary wave is known as the Second Plague Pandemic. The sickness continued to reappear every now and again until the 19th century. But again, where did it come from? The Black Death arrived in Europe from the Black Sea. But where was it before that? Scientists think they have finally tracked it down. Archaeologists have identified a small mountain community near Lake Issyk-Kul in Kyrgyzstan that was devastated by the plague. From 1338 to 1339, their community was almost completely destroyed. That's right, nearly a decade before the plague arrived in Europe, it attacked this mountain village. It's an important piece of information scientists have been holding on to for almost 150 years. Tombstones were found in the ruins of the old village showing a massive number of deaths from an unknown disease. On their tombstones, the cause of death was simply pestilence. Scientists have always known about these tombstones, but it was only now, thanks to new technology, that researchers were able to analyze the DNA of those people who died from pestilence. An international team gathered the human remains for study. The DNA test confirmed the individuals died of the Black Death 8 years before it arrived in Europe. But was this truly the origin? Maria Spyrou from the University of Tübingen thinks yes. Maria said the specific strain found in the victims from Kyrgyzstan is the source strain. Source strain as in the first strain, the OG plague. The strain created by a mutation that diversified the bacterium and made it an unstoppable killing machine. The sanctuary of the water goddess. Let's talk about something that isn't terrifying for a minute. Archaeologists in Iraqi Kurdistan have discovered an incredible sanctuary on the slopes of Mount Piramagrun. It appears to be the ruins of a magical mountain fortress that doubled as a sacred place of worship for a water goddess. 2,000 years ago, the Parthian Empire stretched across Iran and Mesopotamia. They were the biggest players between Rome and China, controlling the Silk Road trading routes connecting the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty. At their peak, right around the time of Jesus, the Parthians controlled land from the edge of modern Turkey to Pakistan. As Persians, the Parthians were followers of Zoroaster, meaning they treasured the holy scripture of the Avesta, the Zoroastrian holy book. In this ancient text, there is a goddess by the name of Anahita. She is depicted as the divine mother of all earthly waters. She was the creator of the oceans, the seas, the rivers, and the lakes. Now for the recent excavation on the mountain. Archaeologists from Heidelberg University uncovered evidence of a fire altar next to a natural waterfall. The fire altar was typical of Zoroastrians. The fact it was found in an ancient Parthian ruin at a waterfall suggests the altar was used in rituals to venerate Anahita. Dr. Michael Brown from the university said fire and water elements played a huge role in the pre-Islamic religions of ancient Persia. But sadly, there's nothing more I can tell you about it. Nobody has worshipped here in 2 millennia, and most people don't even remember Anahita these days. Thanks for watching! Which discovery was your favorite? Which one would you like to learn more about? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you want to see more like this, be sure to stick around for an older video that you might have missed. Lost Grottos of Maijishan. Carved into the face of an enormous mountain are the Maijishan Grottos, with over 7,000 Buddhist sculptures in Tianshui, China. Located just a few miles south of the Silk Road, about 1,500 years ago, members of the later Qin dynasty began to carve caves into the rock. Over the next 12 dynasties, each one left behind their culture, art, and history as more and more caves and sculptures were added. The Maijishan Grottos were built in a part of China where East meets West, when Buddhism was just starting to arrive in China from India. Over the centuries, Maijishan became a center of cross-cultural pollination, with Indians, Mongols, Huns, Sogdians, Tibetans, Chinese, and many other people passing through, leaving their mark on history. This means a lot of the architecture here is quite unique, having inspiration from all over Southeast Asia. These influences were in the earlier days of the caves, just after construction began in the later Qin era between 384 and 417 AD. But after the 6th century, and later during the Song and Ming dynasties, the art within the caves and the beautiful sculptures changed to reflect the influences of a more distinct central China. Now there are 7,200 sculptures and over 1,000 square meters of murals. If we look back to the beginning of the formation of the caves, there is an interesting history. Buddhism wasn't actually in China when the Maijishan Grottos were first carved. Experts say the cave shrines probably served as a way for locals to worship their ancestors or the natural deities they believed in. Then, when Buddhism came along, everything changed. The cave shrines were no longer simple places dedicated to lost loved ones, but important religious centers for the rulers of China. Besides its religious importance, its strategic location on the Silk Road made it prone to invasion, and the monastic community was probably less peaceful than most. The earliest cave artwork dates back to the 5th century, and records from the 1600s report that 1,500 years had passed, and the incense fires never stopped in all that time, even through many years of war. The people of Punt. Ancient Egyptians described the land of Punt as the land of the gods. Modern historians first learned of the people of Punt in 1822, when hieroglyphics were deciphered. They mentioned a land southeast of Egypt, a place that could be reached by either land or sea. Unfortunately, that could be anywhere in a very large region. In 1493 BC, Queen Hatshepsut made an expedition to Punt to establish a trade route between this mythical place and Egypt. However, some historians believe the Egyptians were trading with them from the time of Khufu in 2613 BC. While the exact borders of Punt are still disputed, it probably comprised much of modern Somalia, Sudan, and Eritrea. Some scholars even say Punt may have been the island nation of Sri Lanka. For a long time, there have been many conflicting theories about where Punt was located, but today historians believe it was probably in modern-day Somalia in the Puntland state. The ancient Somalian city of Opone was probably the capital of this forgotten civilization. However, it's not 100% certain. But who exactly were the people from Punt? Nobody really knows. While it was already an ancient historical place to the Egyptians, it was also a place that they traveled to and traded with. There were many legends and stories surrounding the land of Punt, like the old story of an Egyptian sailor who became stranded in Punt, and a great serpent god appeared to him and sent him back to Egypt with gold and spices. The people here were probably great merchants and traders and produced many exotic goods for the Egyptians, but historians honestly know almost nothing about them other than that they existed. Kingdom of Sukhothai. Before Bangkok was the capital of Thailand, before the ancient kingdom of Ayutthaya, there was Sukhothai, the very first kingdom of Siam, which rose in the 13th century. It was the beginning of Thai architecture and culture. The people of Sukhothai incorporated many local traditions from throughout the region and assimilated all the various styles into what would become the Sukhothai style, and eventually what we know today as Thai. The old historic town of Sukhothai is in the lower northern region of modern Thailand. It was the political and administrative capital for the Kingdom of Siam from between the 13th and 15th centuries. There are temples here, Buddhist monasteries, and it became the spiritual center of the region. Buddhism flourished, a common language and alphabet was developed, a legal system was born, and the Siamese culture became distinct from other powerful cultures in the region. The political and administrative systems of Sukhothai were shockingly progressive for the time. They were based on social and religious institutions and common laws. Along with their relatively peaceful society and their impressive agricultural production and industry of high-quality ceramics, the Sukhothai kingdom is still thought of as a golden age in Thai history. What's also really interesting is that the kingdom never really fell in the traditional sense. Ayutthaya, the second major capital of the Kingdom of Siam, was constructed closer to where Bangkok is today, and it grew in power and size to rival Sukhothai, and eventually, the actual city was largely forgotten, and Ayutthaya became the ruling power. The Nok. The Nok culture was one of the earliest communities of Africa. Specifically, they are recognized today as one of the earliest societies from Western Africa that were masters of ironworking. They are also famous for making incredible pieces of pottery. However, not a whole lot is known about the ancient Nok culture, other than what historians can put together based on sculptures and old works of art. We know they existed in modern Nigeria probably from between 500 BC to 200 AD. They farmed crops, they became experts at crafting iron tools, and they produced unique terracotta sculptures that have survived to this day. The culture is known as the Nok simply because a lot of their artifacts have been discovered near this small Nigerian town of Nok, but nobody knows what they called themselves. A few things have been discovered by archaeologists by analyzing the various artifacts left behind. For example, archaeologists traced the clay used to make idols and sculptures back to a single source, suggesting one central authority controlled the entire supply of clay. The Nok likely populated an area of around 30,000 square miles. But it's still difficult to understand the lives of these people, especially because they didn't leave behind much in the way of evidence. They probably transitioned from stone tools to iron tools far before a lot of other cultures in the area, and they were unique in that they never learned to make copper or bronze. They skipped straight from stone to iron. The Clovis. The first culture in America is hotly debated, but many believe it to be the Clovis culture. Evidence of the Clovis people came in the form of spear tips. In New Mexico, a road crew stumbled upon a cache of ancient bones and artifacts in 1932. Edgar B. Howard with the University of Pennsylvania Museum investigated. Throughout years of continuous research, Edgar and his colleagues would discover spear points all across the country. They all seem to belong to the same culture. How could anyone possibly tell just by looking at the tips of spears? It's because spear tips left behind by the Clovis were very distinct. The points were made from jasper, obsidian, stone, and sometimes chert and had very sharp edges. The way they were crafted was way too similar to be a coincidence. These spear tips were even compared to others found in Siberia, where the Native Americans first came from, but they were clearly designed by two separate cultures. This would suggest the spear tips built by the Clovis were the first American inventions. The Clovis people are also believed to have domesticated dogs to have as pets. According to the Smithsonian, over 10,000 of these artifacts have been found in 1,500 locations across North America. Some similar artifacts have also turned up as far south as Venezuela. The oldest so far was found in Texas, and it dates back 13,500 years. Nobody knows anything about this culture other than that they were probably the original hunter-gatherer society in the Americas. A single culture dominated almost all of North America and much of South America, a phenomenon that has never occurred again in the history of human civilization. The single people then eventually broke apart and fractured into thousands of separate tribes and communities, but for a brief period, a single Clovis culture dominated all the land. The Bell Beaker culture. The bell beaker culture is just as mysterious as the Clovis. They were a cultural phenomenon that swept through Britain and Europe 4,500 years ago. Just like how the Clovis culture has been identified by the tips of their spears, the bell beaker culture is identified by the unique beaker-shaped vessels they left behind. Archaeologists still don't know how the bell beaker culture developed so quickly and became so technologically savvy. In the 3rd millennium BC, European people were not that advanced. Metallurgy had only just started to be used. Many people still relied on flint and stone, and this was not a well-developed community. But then, from nowhere, knowledge blossomed. In a very short time span, the people of Europe learned how to create pottery, how to use arrows, how to fashion copper daggers, and many other innovative things. The earliest bell beaker community probably arose somewhere in Portugal in 2750 BC and began the Portuguese Copper Age. Even though the bell beaker culture is seen as a singular entity, it wasn't. Artifacts vary greatly depending on which part of Europe they were found. For example, the communities in England produce slightly different beaker-shaped pieces of pottery than communities in Greece. What scientists and historians have had a hard time figuring out is how all of Europe suddenly rose into a new age of technological development at the exact same time, creating the same kinds of things regardless of distance. The Etruscans. Before Rome was Rome, the dominant people of the day were the Etruscans. This mysterious culture has long since vanished, but they set the stage for what would become one of the greatest empires that ever was. The Etruscans were the first superpower anywhere in the Mediterranean and developed the earliest European cities along with the Greeks. What a lot of people don't know is that some of the most important modern cities in Italy were founded by the Etruscans, specifically in Tuscany, like Florence and Siena. But we don't know much about them, such as where they came from or how they became so advanced. Much of their history has been lost over time. While we have been able to partially decipher the Etruscan language, not all inscriptions can be read and understood, but they had established wealthy cities and trading posts by the 7th century BC. They had a strong navy and worked to expand their territory. They most likely taught the Romans how to use the alphabet and were the ones who spread literacy throughout the peninsula. The Romans also adopted much of their architecture and artistic techniques. When the Romans became more powerful in the 4th century BC, they began to slowly absorb and defeat the Etruscans, burning down their libraries and using much of their construction as their own. What's left of this once powerful advanced civilization is now mostly hidden underground. The Atlanteans. Who were the Atlanteans and where did they go? Historians have been asking this question for 2,400 years, ever since Plato first spoke of an advanced kingdom that sank into the ocean around the year 9600 BC. Academics, philosophers, and historians have never been able to agree on whether Plato had written the story of the lost city of Atlantis as a real part of history or if it was simply a metaphor. The most likely candidate for the lost city of Atlantis and its Atlantean population is the Greek island of Santorini, which was utterly demolished by a volcanic eruption in the year 1600 BC. But the question still remains to this day, was this a real community of people? Plato described Atlantis as being a culture so advanced that nobody from the ancient world would even recognize it. Atlantis was protected by the Greek god Poseidon, but as the Atlanteans became more and more powerful, they became corrupt and greedy. This led to their downfall as they were conquered by the armies of Africa and Europe. Then came the divine punishment, as their fabulous nation was shaken apart by earthquakes and sunk to the bottom of the sea for their sins. There is the possibility that Plato was talking about the Minoans, who were quite advanced with their knowledge of the sea, the arts, architecture, and urban planning, with sewage and plumbing. If Atlantis actually existed, there might be descendants of the Atlanteans walking among us. The Khmer Empire. The Khmer Empire is one of the least discussed ancient powers of the Old World. They were ambitious people from Southeast Asia who ruled all of Cambodia, Thailand, parts of Vietnam, and Laos from between 802 to 1431. The journey to the top began in the 7th century when they inhabited huge parts of land along the Mekong River, one of the largest in the world. It was a culture heavily influenced by India, and even today we can see the subtle blends of Hinduism and Buddhism in Khmer architecture and artwork. The Khmer kingdom settled with the city of Angkor for their capital, what is known today as Angkor Wat, and from there they expanded their territory, fought bloody wars with every single neighbor, and became wildly prosperous. but they could never seem to take over what is now Vietnam. In the year 1177, the Cham people from central Vietnam even looted the great city and almost toppled the empire. But they made a comeback. The Khmer were great builders and conquered the jungle. Their glorious city was recaptured by King Jayavarman VII sometime around 1200 AD, and the Cham were expelled. But sooner or later the empire fell, and there was not much they could do to stop it between the 12th and 14th centuries. It was a perfect storm of other civilizations converging on what is today Cambodia. The Thai people were migrating south and establishing themselves as settlers, while at the same time the Mongol hordes were sweeping through China. Over time, the Thai became wildly powerful, and in 1431 Ayutthaya crushed the Khmer Empire and took their great city. The Indus Valley Civilization. The Indus Valley Civilization was an ancient community of people who prospered alongside more famous ancient cultures like Mesopotamia and Egypt. At the time the Egyptians were building the pyramids, a modern city was being built in India known as Mohenjo-Daro. Here, 5,000 years ago, the streets were laid out in an organized grid. Each house had a toilet and a bath. There were communal trash collection centers on the corner, and there were over 700 wells for everyone to have fresh water. They flourished across much of what is today Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as the northwest areas of India, leaving behind wonderfully modern cities for the day. However, we aren't sure what led to their collapse, or how they were so good at urban planning in 2500 BC. The Indus also had an advanced writing system, except we haven't been able to decipher it. They left behind written accounts that seem illegible, fragmented symbols, strange drawings, and writings archaeologists haven't been able to figure out. But for reasons unknown, they vanished from history almost overnight and abandoned the great nation they'd built in the Indus Valley. Some historians believe they were crushed by another culture because the Indus Valley people were peaceful and had put their energy into creating a sustainable society rather than preparing for war. Thanks for watching! Which of these mysterious ancient cultures is your favorite? What would you like to learn more about? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!